without further ado, I believe, as we pass these, we're going to go ahead and invite our panelists forward. Maybe if we're all here, I will quickly read their bios. We've shortened these. Hope you don't mind that we took a little bit of liberties. Your eminent careers really didn't give us the time, and we wanted to make sure that we heard from you directly. So we know you're humble, good sorts. So first we're going to invite up Miss Johanna Hamilton, who besides directing this wonderful film, also co-produced Pray the Devil Back to Hell, which is also a gripping, awesome film. It's an account of the group of brave and visionary women who demanded peace for Liberia. This film premiered at the 2008 Tribeca Film Festival, where it won the Grand Jury Prize for Best Documentary and was later shortlisted for an Academy Award. It has been shown at hundreds of festivals since then and grassroots screenings all over the world. In fall 2011, it spearheaded the PBS miniseries Women, War, and Peace, and the series also won the Overseas Press Club Edward R. Murrow Award for Best Documentary. So, Ms. Hamilton, can you please come on up, and thank you so very much. Great, and I know we color-coded our mics, and thank you so very much. Next, we're going to have Ms. Betty Medsger. Betty Medsger began her journalism career as a reporter at the Tribune Democratic in Johnstown, and later worked at the Evening Bulletin in Philadelphia, and then the Washington Post, and obviously we thank her so very much for her boldness in publishing this work, right? Or else we might not have seen it. We saw what some other responses were, so thank you very much. And as we know from our film, the awesome film, 2 weeks after the media burglary, she was one of 5 people, 2 members of Congress and 3 journalists who received the first copies of the media FBI files distributed anonymously by the Citizens Commission to investigate the FBI. On June 6, her book, The Burglary, The Discovery of J. Edgar Hoover's Secret FBI, will be honored by the well, I guess we're right there, aren't we? We're right. Yes, how about that? I'm sorry, I was so engrossed in the film. It is presently being honored this week by the investigative reporters and editors with its annual award for Best Book. So thank you very much for your contribution. We look forward to hearing from you. Next, we have a gentleman who I've heard speak. I'm just fired up again to hear you as well, sir. Eddie Conway, please. Eddie Conway is a former Black Panther political prisoner. Mr. Conway served 43 years in the Maryland prison system for a crime he has maintained he did not commit to this day. During this time, Mr. Conway organized many campaigns and programs to assist the prison population, including American Friends Service Committee's very own Friend of a Friend program, with our own Dominique Stevenson, who's in the house today. In addition, Mr. Conway authored 2 books, which are also available outside. The first is The Greatest Threat, The Black Panther Party and COINTELPRO, and Martial Law, The Life and Times of a Baltimore Black Panther, co-authored with, again, AFSC's program director, Dominique Stevenson. So welcome very much, sir. I also want to lift up the Miss Medsger's book. The Burglary is also available for you. You'll see a theme here in a moment. Last but certainly not least, I was so pleased to meet this awesome woman today, to know that I work in the same place where she once I won't say toiled, but certainly worked for peace and justice. Miss Judi Feingold. Miss Judi Feingold worked as a group counselor for the American Friends Service Committee in Philadelphia at the time of the burglary. At a mere age of 19, she was the youngest member of the group that we saw portrayed here in the film. After the burglary, Ms. Feingold decided it would be dangerous to stay in Philadelphia. So she went ahead and moved west of the Rockies, lived underground using an assumed name, and lived on farms that were owned by women, each one a part of a loose network known as Women's Land. Ms. Feingold surfaced after she read news stories about the other burglars revealing their identity after 43 years of silence. So again, to all 4 of our panelists, we thank you so very kindly for your efforts. So,
sorry, if I may, I okayed this with Peter just before. It would be wonderful, because we have 3 of the other burglars here in the audience tonight, if we could welcome, and if you wouldn't mind just maybe sitting here, I feel like the audience might have questions for them. John and Bonnie Rains and Keith Forsyth are also here tonight.
Thank you so very much, Johanna. You are absolutely correct. We have the pleasure of also meeting Mr. Forsyth outside, and just we appreciate the courageousness of your acts as well, even though we know folks were very humble in the film, and I'm sure will be now, assuming that it is what you had to do and what you're called to do, we understand the courage it took. And we do have something special for you, but I might have failed in my role as moderator to not have your special gift, but we'll make sure to give it to you in time. So what we'll do now, hopefully you've had your cards, and as we listen and certainly absorb what has been said, we want folks to begin to think of their questions, and we will, Lucy, if you can wave again perhaps, and our very own Peter Limbs, who works with our wage peace work and is a program officer here, will be collecting those. We've encouraged our speakers here at this panel to think about their experiences and their role in either making this film, what we've uncovered, in our time together, and to think about a couple of questions here. So each panelist will have 5 minutes or so, and we certainly invite our other dear newest panelists to come, because I think we finished the film a little early. We've asked them to frame their remarks around 3 questions, if they will, for the next 5 minutes each. One, the first question we put forward: what was the significance of the burglary at the time, especially the findings and discoveries? So that's kind of the first question. Obviously, the act itself, and how that felt in very much real time in 1971, and we know the echoes move forward to today. Secondly, kind of helping us relive that time a little bit, tell a sort of personal story about the event or the time, and it kind of brings it home. It's often we watch film, we might have 8mm, whatever we have going on, but to really bring home what was going on at that time, 44 years hence, is something we thought would be really valuable to the folks in attendance today. And finally, it's very difficult to look at 1971 to hear about these infringements on rights and not to begin to think about 2015. Have we seen expansion of that? Have we seen constriction? So again, what is the significance of the break in current events, sort of bringing it forward? So if I might, in the order that we've introduced, we're going to ask Ms. Hamilton to begin. And again, as you're thinking and absorbing about the film and what you heard, we hope, we understand, we know folks will have great questions that we'll take from you. So please, Ms. Hamilton.
Thank you so much, Bilal. I feel I have the least of everybody sitting on this panel here to contribute, so I'll keep my remarks very brief. Just in terms of 1971, I was born in 1971, so a month before the burglary. So it was obviously just my enormous privilege to know Betty, which is how I came to know about the story, to have access to the story. I've been fascinated by this era in American history since I was a teenager, so that was a personal predilection. So when Betty shared the outlines of the story with me, I urged her to think about a film. That was some years ago now, and I just feel very fortunate. Betty and I had this personal relationship and now have had this professional collaboration for a long time. It was, as I said, an immense privilege to be able to tell this little-known story. It's little known elsewhere. It's very well known in Philadelphia, I feel like. And there's obviously so much history in the room, so I'm going to pass it straight along to Betty for her to share, and everyone else.
Thank you, Johanna. Well, it was a great privilege for me to collaborate with Johanna after working for many years and on a book. I realized that a film would bring the story alive for so many more people than a book. So the idea that we have both and that we have worked together is wonderful. I'd also like to say that as someone who was here covering the peace movement before I went to the Washington Post, I was here 67 until the end of 69, that this is such a special place. And I think I've heard John Raines say this, that the idea might not have ever been possible for Bill Davidan, who we're so sorry did not live to share this experience with us. He had the idea, but it might not have been possible for that idea to be born except for this extraordinary community. The peace movement here, I think, was so special because of Quakers and those, what I consider new Catholics, who were breaking out as a result of the Second Vatican Council, Episcopal Peace Fellowship, and so many other people who were somehow able to work together here in ways that were more cooperative and productive and actual resistance than any place else I know of at that time. And I think that the burglary does owe a lot to that. As a reporter, I guess maybe I'm in a position to talk about the reaction of the public at the time. it really was such a strong reaction when the files started to come out, because Hoover was so beloved by most American people. And Bill Davidon had this vision, which with the others also came to believe, or they would not have made such a great risk and potential sacrifice, that if the American people could know and have documentary evidence of what J. Edgar Hoover was doing, that they would want to do something. And indeed, that was true, especially after COINTELPRO was revealed, thanks to Carl Stern taking one of the files and suing the government. And I guess I'll just would like to add that of the many things that we learned of J. Edgar Hoover's activities that ranged from crude to cruel to violent, through all of that, the dominant thread was African Americans, the attack on African Americans. And it began with the description here of the massive surveillance of the black people of Philadelphia. But those files referred to the fact that that program existed all over the country. But it was at every level, the suspicionless crime, as well as the attack on the Black Panthers and other organizations, and including participating in plots to kill and plots to put black people in prison for many years for crimes that they didn't commit. And that was, in fact, the reports on what was happening to African Americans that caused people, when the media files came out, to say, this is like Stasi, this is like what the dreaded secret police of East Germany is doing, and something must be done about it. They did an amazing thing, the burglars.
Yeah, well, I'm a direct victim of this program, and one of the things that happened in 1971 when this occurred, the Black Panther Party was reeling from attacks across the country. I think there was like 37 chapters in 37 states, and during this period, 25 of them had been attacked, and the leadership had been either ran out of the country, secondary leadership had been locked up, the whole organizational apparatus was in disarray, there was internal conflicts. We really, honestly, did not understand what was going on in 1971. There seemed to be a lot of strange things happening in our ranks. We knew that there were agent provocateurs, but we never really understood the scope and the depth of the infiltration and the destruction directed by the FBI and the other agencies, because COINTELPRO wasn't just an FBI operation, it was the Army intelligence, it was other agencies, almost every other agency in the government was connected to the FBI's program. We didn't understand what was going on, and so a lot of us was in jail trying to figure out where we went wrong. Things were happening that were causing dozens and dozens of us to get locked up. It wasn't part of what we were learning. It wasn't part of what we was doing in the community, but the end result was that we were under attack constantly. So when the break-in took place and there was an explanation about this, at that point we said, oh, okay, it's not that we're doing things wrong, things are being done wrong to us. And I think at that point we had hope that it would be straightened out, it would be changed, it would be corrected, that somebody would say, oh, okay, this is wrong, and fix it. Well, in some cases, that might be the case, but in the case of the Black Panther Party and the Black Panther Party political prisoners and the parts of the Black Liberation Movement, most of the guys are still in the prison system now. A lot of the people have died in the prison system. Some of the people are still outside of the country right now, can't come back in, that were victims of this program. So, you know, it was very significant that it was revealed, but it's also equally significant that no redress was given to the people that were the victims of this program. And one of my personal stories, and I'm not going to take up too much time, is in 1969 when I was going through Illinois. I wanted to stop in and see Fred Hampton, and I knew he had been working up in Chicago, but I didn't have time to do it, and on the way back across the country, we were forced to run back to New York because the New York 21 had got locked up. And so I missed seeing Fred Hampton. That was in July. In December, he was assassinated, and we all thought it was a rogue operation from the Chicago Police Department. Some people had took advantage of a situation and set him up and framed him. And it wasn't until years later that we found out that this was part of the COINTELPRO thing. So the COINTELPRO operation was not just locking us up, running us out of the country, but it was orchestrating out assassinations. And so personally, that always impacted upon me because I never got to see him, and at the same time, I never realized how vicious the government was in terms of destroying our lives. And of course, you know, at that time I was in the prison system, so I had a personal sample of that viciousness, right? I think it's important today because COINTELPRO goes back before '56 in different names, in different forms, and different shapes, and it comes up into 2015, even though the Patriot Act has been modified to some degree, the NDAA, the National Defense of America Act, has been taken over from what COINTELPRO was doing illegally. Now it is legally codified for the government to do all those things, and all those things are being done today that was done to us. And I think the only significance about all this is that they were being done the whole time in the black community. Now they're being done across the board in the American community.
Here we go, Judi. I'll give you my microphone. I also want to say, sorry, Judi, do people know, was there an introduction? Do people know, I mean, Bilal did a great job of introducing Judi, but this is only the second time that Judi has ever appeared publicly with the film.
And is that why I can't use a mic well?
But it was really amazing. Today was the first time that she'd seen John and Bonnie in 44 years.
So,
And I just want to say we are going to give a chance for our other folks. We want to introduce them.
well, I agree with Mr. Conway, absolutely. What was personally happening to me at the time was I was a law-abiding citizen working for American Friends Service Committee as a military counselor. And as military counselors, we were counseling people who were in the military on how to use the Uniform Code of Military Justice to exit the military if they wanted to, whether it was for hardship reasons or conscientious objection or for whatever reasons. Our goal was to get people out of the military that didn't want to be in it because of the draft and personal circumstances. And so here I was living in Palatine Village, and not breaking any laws, and walking my dogs in the morning before work, walking my dogs after work, and being under surveillance by the FBI. And we just all felt that if people were aware of what was going on, that the public would move, that we needed to get information out so it wouldn't just be a rumor that people were under surveillance, that, you know, that organizations were being targeted. So that, you know, was my personal goal of participating in the burglary. And that's all I have to say for right now.
Since our dear friends were good enough to cede some time and you spoke so quickly, Ms. Feingold, we also want to hear from our, all right, look at that. This is a can-do kind of group. Awesome. So as we take a little moment, then what we will do is to take a few questions. Again, we're going to then open up an opportunity for folks to still communicate more, not in this room because we need to break down, and then we'll have some books as well. So the first question that we have, and certainly maybe we can start in the back, we'd love to hear your voices as well. Are protests and marches today leading us to real resistance and interruption of the systems of power? What are the best ways to make sure this happens? So I guess in two parts. Firstly, do you see kind of the new wave of protests and marches today leading up to what we consider real resistance in these systemic, in a very systemic way? A yes or no? And if no, what are the best ways to make sure this happens? Or can we augment the protests if you do feel that they've had a systemic effect? And maybe we can start in the back. If you want to just tell us your name again. I think we remember you from the film, but if you want to give us your name, and we'd love your answer to that.
Hi, I'm Keith. You know, my personal answer to that question is you never know until after the fact. I mean, the example that pops into my mind is when SDS called for the first national demonstration against the Vietnam War, and if memory serves, 65, they thought, you know, maybe 1,000 people would show, and there were like 25,000. And, you know, on the other side of the coin, there have been many calls to resist unjust things where nobody showed up. So you can't, I don't think you can go into it with the idea of, well, if this isn't a massive success, we've failed. You got to fight the fight, and sometimes history is on your side, and sometimes it's not. You know, the kind of mass movements we had in the 60s and 70s are a historical exception, not a historical rule. And, you know, things go and come in cycles, and who knows, you know, whether I'm going to live to see the next one or not, I don't know. But in my opinion, you don't worry about that. You do what you got to do. And, you know, as the guy with the beard said, history will absolve us.
Well, this nation is a disaster, isn't it? We've become radically unequal in terms of the distribution of wealth, which means we've become radically unequal in terms of how power works. We've become a plutocracy, not a democracy. We're run by Wall Street in Washington. What happened to the notion written into the beginning of our Constitution? We, the people, in order to form a more perfect union. We don't count anymore. And that makes me very mad. And I think it makes you very mad. I think there's a lot of anger out there. Righteous anger, that's great. Righteous anger is not sloppy anger. Sloppy anger is anger that takes out the frustrations upon people who have less power, those people coming over from Mexico and trying to find a future here. That's sloppy anger. It's understandable. I mean, the working class has been destroyed. But righteous anger is patient, it's accurate, and it's determined. I do believe that this nation is ready for a large change. I'm a college teacher, and I know below the surface of what seems to be the cynicism of the students is a righteous anger waiting for a match.
If anyone else wants to take that question, I feel like we're family, so I don't want to just point out folks, but you know, if anybody else wants to speak to protests and marches today leading us to real resistance, and if not, how we can make sure this happens, we have another question that sort of dovetails into that. But if anyone would like to speak to that, please.
Yeah, if I can, and I don't want to take too much, but I think Vietnam, the conditions in America during that period represented something unique. I think the age of innocence was coming to an end. People were seeing America, seeing the real face of America. I think it was a crisis, a moral crisis, a crisis of consciousness. I think people rose up in the early 60s with the free speech movement, black awareness, the voting rights, the whole 9 yards. I think they eventually gelled and came together, not only just formed protests, but eventually led into movements that were seeking change. I think today we're at the beginning of something like that again, not of Vietnam, but in this particular case, the planet is in jeopardy and the populations of the planet is in jeopardy, and young people and other people can see that, and it's a crisis again. And this time it's a crisis of survival, whether or not we go into the future in a totalitarian society for our children, our grandchildren, et cetera, or whether or not we make some significant changes that have a better distribution of the resources of the planet. People can see that now. It's going to be a couple years, I believe, before we actually see a significant challenge to that and a change to that. But I think we see the seeds of that now. So I think it's a possibility of a positive future or a very ugly future.
Thank you. And you know what, what Mr. Conway just said sort of dovetails into the next question we have. We've heard a little bit about you talking about the planetary imperative. We talked about some of what we're going through today in 2015, and that history is indeed vindicated, what Keith said. So this question here sort of dovetails there. The question is, what do you think has contributed to the decline of culture of resistance? So we talked about marches and sort of these things happening, but I guess it would be accepting that we see a decline in that work, given that history has vindicated that some of these actions and folks are often lifted up. Can you speak at all to what you see as contributing to the decline of the culture of resistance? And I think Mr. Conway started that, but what still gives you hope about resistance movement today? So we talked about marches, but just maybe taking a step back, do you see in the broader context that there's just a general decline of the culture of resistance, and where might you see that stemming from? And even given that marches or elsewise, where are the reasons for optimism, maybe that what you see when you look out on the landscape in the U.S. today? So if anybody would like to maybe tackle that question of where culture of resistance decline and what you might see that gives you hope and optimism.
Okay. Oh, no. Is this on?
Our technical advisor.
This one's on.
Yes, there we go.
Well, Occupy happened, didn't it? And that was very interesting. It started out in New York City. Within 2 weeks, it was all over the world because they knew what Wall Street was about, and they knew the world was being raped by Wall Street. Well, if it happened then, it can happen again. I believe in people. I think when people feel that their fundamental civil liberties, their rights, their voice is taken away from them, I think they will rebel against that. They will not be quiet. They will stand up. And it's not going to be just in this country. It's going to be all over the world. And my friend in front of me here is quite right. It's going to be about sustainability. We cannot go on living the way us folks in this country are living and then send that overseas in the name of development. That will destroy the environment. So we got big issues on our hands. Occupy showed us it can happen almost overnight, surprise everybody. I think that's going to happen again.
Yeah, okay, we have a bunch. Looks like we're going to get through many of these, and unless there are other thoughts, and I'm so glad you have the mic, Ms. Raines, if I might call you that, because there's a question specifically directed to you. I hope you don't mind. We often talk about the intersectionality. I know Mr. Conway has talked a little bit about how that impacted the African American community. The question here speaks to in the film. You said you felt marginalized in your role initially. So we've got some folks who want you to, if you wouldn't mind, digging a little deeper in there. I wasn't going to go to questions specifically, but you were so humble about it. We got one directed for you. So if you wouldn't mind speaking to the marginalized role, and can you expand on that in any way you'd like?
So I guess there was a little dissent going on there in the movement, wasn't there? That was not unusual in the movement, that men took the lead roles for the most part, and we were in a supportive role. And it was easy to peg me for that because I was a young mom and I cooked a lot of meals for folks and put sleeping bags on the floor. But at a certain point, I guess my anger and my frustration took control, and I said, this is not reasonable. I have more to offer. I'm ready. And so I guess I confronted some folks in the movement and said, I'm going to step forward and have a different kind of role. And it turned out that I did, actually. It worked out.
You yanked this chain.
Yeah, I yanked his chain.
We're so very glad you did, and thank you for that comment. And if I could just go maybe to one more pointed question, and then we'll go back to the group ones, and I think we can answer most of these. Mr. Conway, so folks had asked, I don't know if you have specific numbers on this, but how many members of the Black Panther Party are still in prison for crimes manufactured by the FBI? I know that number's probably, unfortunately, sprawling, but could you speak to a bit about that?
At this point, there seems to be 19 people that identify themselves directly connected to the Black Panther Party and COINTELPRO. There's a number of other people still in prison that never identified themselves as being part of the Black Panther Party, don't want to be identified as. Sorry about that. I'm so used to speaking without a mic, I'm sorry. It's like 19 people so far that still remain in the prison systems across America that's identifiable as former members of the Black Panther Party. There's a number of other people that's not identifiable, don't want to be identified, don't want to be associated, that's still in jail. And there's members also that were not members of the Black Panther Party, but members of the Black Liberation Army, which was the outgrowth of fight back and resistance from the Black Panther Party, the Republic of New Africa, Black liberation movements, white liberation movements, anti-imperialist movements. And so there's people that are not even identified that's still in there, and there's people that that's still out of the country. And of course, everybody know about Asata, she's in Cuba, but there's people in Africa, there's people in Europe that cannot come back to America.
Wonderful. And if I can take a little moderator's privilege, I'm going to try to combine these, because I think these are all great questions, and we'd like to get to a few. The next question we have talks about the explicit link was made between COINTELPRO and the Patriot Act, but one person in our audience asked about any thoughts about the link between Panthers and Black Lives Matter. So we also have a question here that talks about, would you put yourselves on the line again and using your privilege such as it exists to challenge this racist system, and do you participate in Black Lives Matter? So I don't want to lose the essence of the question, but perhaps if maybe some folks could think about what we understand about the specific targeting of African American men and women and black and brown folks, and then bringing that forward to the Black Lives Matter movement that we have in front of us. So I know that's a lot, and I hope I didn't miss the essence of that question, the two questions, but if folks could speak to what about today? I guess specifically in the context of, would you put yourself on the line again, and what do you see when you look out and see some of the efforts that are assembled under the Black Lives Matter banner and movement?
So I think everybody certainly in this room is well aware that the killing of innocent people for being black is not a new phenomenon. In fact, it was, so common, probably much more common when we were young than it is now. But it was just taken for granted. People in general, did not fight it. And so to me, the really optimistic thing is that people were taking it on, and not just a few people, a lot of people. I haven't participated in the movement yet, but I'm glad to see that it's happening. If anybody else wants to say.
I'd like to just speak about the continuum that is likely from J. Edgar Hoover to now. It's very hard to look back and see that there was a half century of Hoover's racism that permeated the FBI and the training of FBI agents at the academy, but also at the academy trained local police from all over the United States. And the racism was a fundamental part of the FBI during those years. And when you see now, I think we can't help but acknowledge the fact that the video is revealing to the largely white population what black people have known as evidence for a long time. So that what we're learning, I think that there probably is a continuum here that does begin with J. Edgar Hoover, and that I hope connects with what is happening now to finally face this issue in a strong way.
Okay. Well, since we're kind of tying in today, I would like to also, again, we want to get as much of this as we can. A couple of questions came up, obviously Edward Snowden, and in the whistleblower context more broadly. I know that's a different context than what we saw in 1971. So one just pretty much asks, is Edward Snowden a hero? So I think we can maybe combo that with the other question that asks, how do you assess today's level of surveillance broadly as revealed by Edward Snowden compared to 71. So if we want to go yay or nay on hero status for Mr. Snowden, and then if we could just maybe, and also just speak a little bit to what is his work, what is that effort peel back the layer on compared to what we're looking at in 71? In either order of those questions, and any of our panelists, please.
I think the main difference is that Edward Snowden, do we need this? Okay, that Edward Snowden did this from the inside, and we did it from the outside. That I think is just one small difference, but I think the essence is of all whistleblowers, whether you're a whistleblower and you're in the organization or you see what's going on and you want to do something about it and bring it into the public eye. I think we all agree. I mean, I'm not comfortable with hero status for me, but if you want to say, Edward Snowden's a hero, definitely, because he's a whistleblower, and that was information that was important for all of us to know, and we wouldn't have known it if it wasn't for him.
Just a quick one on the difference in the surveillance. I mean, to make a complex story a simple one, in those days, the FBI was targeting specifically anyone who was a critic of the political system. And some of that was surveillance, and some of it went far beyond surveillance, as Mr. Conway talked about, and other people. And the Patriot Act surveillance is a little different in that it's targeting everyone. The metadata collection was everybody's metadata, not just people who were critical. And so in some ways, as far as we know, they're not assassinating American citizens on American soil anymore, but they moved on to surveilling everyone. So, it's, I don't know if that's better or worse, but it is different.
The second president of the United States, John Adams, was a wise man, and he once said, "Those who would sacrifice liberty to gain security deserve neither." That's where we are as a country right now. We have to make very serious decisions about what liberties we're willing to sacrifice in order to gain what kind of security. How can we declare an end to the war on terrorism? If you can't declare an end to war, then the war goes on forever. Is that what we want? Is that the price we have to pay for security? That we give up our liberty? If we give up our liberty, what's worth struggling for in terms of national security? What's the nation we're supposed to secure? What are the values? that we want to secure. Thank you.
Yeah, I do want to say one thing. I think Snowden, Bradley Manning, Chelsea, I think, no, they're not heroes, they're human beings. And I think they was inside that system, and Snowden participated and operated and helped surveil people. At some point, as a human being, there was a level of consciousness, a level of questioning the morality of what was being done. He decided to come back and join the human race. I think that's commendable. I think there was a great sacrifice made by doing that, and I think other people have to make that sacrifice. But even when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about 1984. We know, and we've been knowing, and we've been talking about that the government has been doing this kind of stuff, that the government was capable of doing this kind of stuff. I mean, this is not rocket science for activists, intellectuals. This is something we've all been aware of. The fallacy is that we have allowed it to happen to oppressed people, minorities, people all over the world, people of color, the School of Americans. We have watched this stuff happen in our name, and we've said nothing, and we've been silent about it. And now we're kind of like in a state of shock because it's happening to us. It's happening here with our money. Well, it's been happening for 500 years to us. It's certainly happened to the Native Americans. It's certainly happened to the Latinos. It's certainly then happened to people all over the world, and we have silently watched it. And so now people step up, they speak up, and they say, oh, this is wrong. They're not heroes. They're just finally joining the human race.
I think for those of us today to kind of think about these as human beings who do amazingly courageous things, but maybe to just demystify that a little bit, and thank you for that. And we're wrapping right down to our time, so there's two more questions, and Professor Raines, if I can call you that, you spoke so eloquently about that. There's one more specific question for you, and then we're going to get one that I hope maybe all the panelists can speak to, and we'll turn it over to our dear Peter Lims to take us on home. Professor Raines, what was the role of faith in your motivation to do the burglary and other activities? It's always interesting to read that as a burglar, right? You're a burglar, sir. But what was the role then? I know there's many, I recognize many people here from Quaker meetings, faces, and maybe not. But can you talk about, not just from an activist perspective, but as a person of faith, or what role do you see faith playing in that, and you're feeling compelled to be a part of what happened in this awesome film we just watched today, sir?
Well, I was surrounded by a community of faith. It wasn't just my faith, it was the faith that I shared with others and they shared with me. The reason we weren't found, in part, was because Philadelphia was a community of resistance of tremendous proportions, and many of you were part of that. The reason we could hide successfully from the FBI, although they sent 200 agents to try to find us, was that we were fish swimming in an ocean of fish, and all the fish were swimming the same direction. The FBI couldn't begin to find us. So a community of faith is a community that can last and express loyalty and pass the values from one generation to the next. I was a Sunday school boy. Many of you perhaps were Sunday school kids too. I went to Sunday school, every day, every Sunday. We learned our burglary skills from priests and nuns. Yes, that's true. The Berrigan movement, priests and nuns, the radical, wonderful Catholic left. The community of faith is the hope of the human future.
Thank you, and it's just so awesome to see the humility that everyone has here today. But we're going to ask you to jump out there a little bit for this last question. I know there's probably lots of ways to answer this, but if you could, as many folks as would like to, and then we'll turn it over to Peter. The question suggests that these days the public is well aware of government's abuse of power and surveillance, but does not necessarily feel a sense of power to stop it. Agency, correct. So the question part of there says, what do you see as our charge for today? So I know I hate to drop that right as the last question, what is the charge? But with all the folks here together, we've talked about communities of faith, we've talked about folks not being heroes who jump out, that this is something, these are principled stands. We talked about the great sacrifices folks have made, the great creativity brought forth by the author and director here. So if you could just say a few words to just what you feel is the charge for other directors and writers and activists and freedom fighters and communities of faith, is there something that you would leave with us if you could? To just say what is the charge for, what would you see as the charge for today as we leave this evening?
I don't know if anybody's dying to jump in. I mean, I would say, not to end on a negative note, there's been so much positivity. I mean, definitely, certainly in the documentary world, a film like this, a story like this, there's definitely a moment oftentimes where the lights come up at the end of the film and people feel motivated to go and do something. And we struggled with that, with making this film. What is it that people can do precisely to this question? Because there is this sort of overwhelming sense that, the surveillance today, that we know about thanks to Edward Snowden is all pervasive. We all carry around a tracking device in our pockets. I do too. What can we do about it? Preserve your privacy. It feels like there's nothing you can do, right? It feels like so easy to throw up your hands. This week the USA Freedom Act was passed. It's a tiny improvement on the Patriot Act. It's very slow. It's an improvement. It's a tiny improvement. It's incremental. I mean, but I feel like hopefully what people leave the room feeling is whatever it is, whatever your personal activism is, and I'm sure there's such history in this room, whatever it is that you feel strongly about, whether it's surveillance or inequality in our society, hopefully it just gives you a little extra oomph to go out there and actually do whatever it is, however small that step is.
I think about this, as I'm sure we all do, as I have these memories of when people were really angry, and people met on the street, and I tend to think that all that face-to-face dealing meant quite a bit. And we have the technology now to organize very effectively, but I still wonder if missing the face-to-face is insignificant. This came up in Boston one night after the screening, and afterwards, a person in his 20s came up to me and he said, we really do, my generation, many of us, we really do feel very concerned. But he said, we are not shocked. That the difference was back then for the United States as a whole, while they were divided and there was an active movement for civil rights and then an active movement against the Vietnam War, there still was a great deal of innocence and among the population, and so people were shocked and surprised when they learned something like the atrocious stuff done by J. Edgar Hoover, and they demanded that something be done. And he said, we don't feel that way because we're not surprised. We almost expect to learn this kind of thing. And he cared a great deal and was thinking about where to go with this. And I think it's such an important discussion. On the other hand, referring to what Johanna said about the incremental step forward that we saw with the vote in Congress, I think what is maybe more interesting and to realize that discussion wouldn't have taken place. First of all, it wouldn't have taken place at all except for what we learned from Edward Snowden. But it also wouldn't have taken place except for the fact that in regard to this subject, the polls do show a steady progression of opposition by the American people to the kind of surveillance that Snowden has revealed. So I think it's just so important to grab hold of this. I'm not so sure that the polls show this in regard to the racial matters that are taking place.
And I think that we should do, all of us should do whatever is reasonable and comfortable for us to do and still continue to have a life. But everybody should be involved on some level, doing something in their community, around the environment, around the future, whether it's something small or whether it's something large, whether it's just writing letters to somebody, whether it's making connections, whether it's organizing in food deserts, whatever works for you, however it works, then that's what you do. Don't overextend yourself, and I know about overextending yourself. So don't overextend yourself, but get involved, and that's how you change the future. And no matter how many times and how many agencies surveil, they can't surveil the whole planet. So we can make a change.
I think it's important to just keep questioning. You can tell when you feel like something's wrong, whether it's happening in an individual to individual basis, or it's happening in your community, or something's written in an organization that you know takes a stand that just feels wrong to you. You just keep questioning and talking to people. I mean, community grassroots organizing, it's worked for many, many a century, and it continues to work.
I don't have anything to add.
I think they're done up there.
Okay. So we do have our charge. I know you don't have anything to add, Professor, but I'm going to jump in that sea you talked about there, that ocean. That was inspiring to me. I'm going to put my fins on and jump in there as well. And so, yeah, I just want to say thank you. Easiest moderation ever, because the awesome questions we have. And just, can we give the panel one more hand? I am going to ask you to sit tight for a moment. We have one last thing we want to do, but let's just please. And let's give you guys a hand as well, because we understand you could have been anywhere Thursday evening, but you came here. And our fabulous Lucy and our fabulous Peter are going to close this out. And thank you guys very much.
We want to thank all of you for shedding sunlight on this issue, but especially we want to honor the burglars for your courage in opening the door to this revelation.